So next up we have somebody I know very well, Nigel Buckland from Leeds Beckett University. Sometimes call him boss, but he's also the person I like to refer to as the man I would ring in the middle of the night if I accidentally killed somebody and would like to hide the body. Or alternatively, my phone a friend. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Nigel up to the stage for his session, Surveillance to Software with Mr. Vane, Courageous Leadership in IT.
No, it's fine. We can come back to Mr. Vane. So, I'm Nigel Buckland, Associate Director of IT Operations at Leeds Beckett University. What that means in everyday terms is I've got under my area the service desk, second level support for both IT and AV. I've got the procurement team, the comms team, and recently all of the infrastructure teams. So that's network, the core infrastructure, and cloud. So fairly extensive. What the hell's this all about? It's an odd title. I've got an odd beard. If anyone's read the bio, many of you are probably thinking, what's a pointer? And I've never heard of bluegrass. This is a story. I was really glad that we mentioned stories earlier, because what I want to do and what I'm hoping to achieve with this is to talk about a different entry route into IT and being an IT professional. Because I'm not an IT professional. In fact, this job is my first job in IT. How does that work? What are the skills that are transferable? What are the values? What are the leadership decisions that I've made which I think will bring value to Leeds Beckett University, but also the wider team? I also want to talk about how by putting people, not tech, at the heart of what we do is key. Because that's what we're all about. That's what leadership's all about. It's not about the detail of the technology. It's about mobilizing the resources, mobilizing the people to deliver effective outcomes. And in our industry, that's for our students. You know, the people that are now paying a significant amount of money to move them forwards. What I hope you'll also get out of this is encouragement to seek out every opportunity and to focus on what leadership means to you and how you can apply it every day. I've got to be honest though, one of the key deliverables for this for me is to get Sally off my back and to deliver exactly what she asked me to do. Okay, let's start. Everyone's got a slightly different view of leadership. For me, and I rarely look over the pond to our former colonial cousins, but on this one I genuinely take inspiration from one of their great leaders in the last war. Oh, what's going on now? Got it? So I'll read it. Leadership is the art of getting someone else to do something you want done because he or she wants to do it. I think that encapsulates everything. The way I'm going to bring this to life is through the story of my journey. I want to give context to the views why I believe courageous leadership is essential if you're going to have effective working partnerships with all of your teams, with all of your stakeholders, and with all of your customer groups. To bring this story to life and to show the different lens that I'm looking through, I apologize, I have put a few photos of me. I could argue that it is about context. Actually, it's a lesson to you all to really see how quickly you can go downhill when you let yourself go with age. So, I'll explain these later, but at school, it may come as a surprise, I was a nightmare. I was good at rugby. I loved caving. I was in the school CCF. I played a lot of poker. Didn't do too much work. The first sensible decision that I made at 18 was actually not to go to university. I did have the grades, I did have the place, but I recognized that I was immature. I was also fit at that time. I was packed full of testosterone. I wanted to go out. I wanted to see the world. So I decided to enter Sandhurst, and that was in September 1985. I'd been brought up on a diet of commando comics stories from my uncle who was on D-Day, my dad who served in East Africa, and the Falklands War had only just finished. Jingoism abounded. So for those that don't know, Sandhurst is designed to create all of the army officers that serve in the British Army. It's focused for you to be fit, to lead effective teams, but at the time, and probably still now, it was very, very public school. I wasn't. I was born in Halifax. If you read the bio, I said I was born in Halifax at the age of 5. That's because I was adopted, and I don't really remember anything before that. That doesn't bother me. I grew up in a very nice family in Leeds, but state school all the way through. Sandhurst was not that. It was 75% non-graduates at the time. There was approximately 60% that did go to public school, and in my platoon alone, and the platoon was about 30 people in training, 5 of them went to Eton. So Sandhurst, this vehicle that's going to design you to be the effective leader for the British Army, is 7 months long. That's it. At the end of the 7 months, aged 18, and that photo was taken 3 days after I took command of a platoon in Northern Ireland, I was given 31 soldiers and was given a patrol area in an area called the Cregan, which is in the centre of Londonderry, and it was still interesting times. My platoon had suffered a casualty 3 months before I got there. One of its members was shot 6 times in the head. I stayed in Northern Ireland for a little over 12 months, mainly doing rural and urban patrols. One of the things I'll come back to is self-awareness. I recognised during that time that actually being a foot soldier on the ground, you were a target. You were a walking target. You were someone that something was going to happen to, and actually the war that was being led, and it was a war at that point, was intelligence-led. So I applied for a transfer to the Intelligence Corps. I was accepted, and I then moved across and did a number of months training in Kent before moving on to the next stage. I think one notable incident I will say at this point is I do have an entry in Hansard in the government record. There was an official complaint raised against me. Unfortunately, when the battalions rotated through, after a month of doing operations in Northern Ireland, you went on a month's training, or 2 weeks training, 2 weeks leave. Before you go back on that training, which for us was back in the UK, it was tradition that you went to the Bushmills distillery. We went, we got canned. We then got on a flight from Aldergrove. Unfortunately, at the front of the plane was the Reverend Ian Paisley. Maybe I wasn't efficient in controlling the enthusiasm of my guys. A formal complaint was written. I then moved on, had a dream posting, went to Cypress. Cypress was brilliant. The challenge of Cypress was that 6 months after I got there, Mr. Hussein decided that the holidays in Kuwait were great. He invaded, and I spent 11 months in the Gulf. During most of that time, I was working with the 1st US Marine Division. I ran a joint forward interrogation team. A fantastic introduction to a different culture, and it was a great culture. Again, I'll bring the context of that back later on. At the end of the Gulf War, went back to Cyprus, had 2 months in the sun, and then back to the UK. Life continued. My career from that point, though, was fundamentally human, what we call human intelligence. And I carried on in those roles until '98. Human intelligence is all about people. Fundamentally 3 disciplines. First is research, dealing with informants, dealing with agents, recruiting them, speaking to them, motivating them, getting information to provide customer requests. Different context, but isn't that what most of us do on a daily basis? Covert passive surveillance, back to the title, that was my core discipline. Following people, watching people, understanding how they operated, understanding what they want, what they were likely to do, and tactical debriefing and interrogation. These photos, just a few snapshots. So during those years, I spent time in the Gulf. I was based on the USS Abraham Lincoln, an American carrier, 5,000 people. I served in North Iraq in the Kurdish mountains. My last operational posting was 11 months in Bosnia, just after the siege of Sarajevo. Again, the consistent thing in all of this is people. And as I say, you do this every day. It's just a different lens. And then I left. It was my choice. There was no planning, realistically. There was no real idea of what I wanted to do next, where I wanted to do it. But actually it was a second sensible conversation that I had with myself. That self-awareness came over again. I was burnt out, actually, although no one would have admitted at the time. I was suffering from mental issues. You know, I was tired, I needed to do something else. Had I stayed, Viv and the kids probably wouldn't have done for long. It was a very selfish existence. So then I made sensible decisions. Before I moved into the Royal Bank of Scotland, I applied to be a job as one of the managers at the largest nightclub in Leeds, Majestics, and spent a year and a half running a nightclub. Brilliant, brilliant job, but with 2 young kids working all hours of the day, not the most sensible decision I've ever made. Equally, I thought I was used to blood, guts, gore, and trauma. 2,000 highly charged individuals on a daily basis really tested every ounce of skill I had. And as I say, then to Royal Bank of Scotland. Moved into an operational service management role, working their authorisation centres based in Gateshead and Harrogate at the time. Then migrated down to the sales team when RBS decided to remove WorldPay from its portfolio. And that unit was sold for $6 billion in 2010, and I was one of a sales team of 50, a very small part of that sales team. And then moved on to business model design. Again, mainly in micropayments, mainly overseas. That shot's from Beijing. Spent 6 months working with the Bank of China on a joint venture. I come back really to, so what? That's just a story. Yeah, it might be an interesting story, but so what? How has this shaped my approach to leadership in IT? And when I sat down with Sally and said, well, really, what are you trying to get out of me having this discussion today? I felt, well, where can I add value? And the first piece that all of this journey led me to have a really conscious decision with myself was in respect of what are my core values. For me, it's the one thing that none of us probably spend enough time working out. What are our values as individuals? What drives us? What motivates us every day? And then how can we align that and share that with our wider teams? I'm going to point Alistair out. He came and did a fantastic session with us in Leeds about 6 months ago. I would absolutely encourage you to invest time in this particular discipline. But we'll go to that in a second. So the first of those values, courage. When I talk through this again, I'm going to refer back to elements of my career which may show you why I had such a fantastic opportunity to actually focus my mind on what these were. All of these, there are similar opportunities in IT. You share the same challenges. Different context, different place, probably less beer, probably less sand, but you do face them. The first point, and this is the biggest one on courage, is actually the courage to recognize that you don't need to be the expert. You're in charge of an organization. That's fantastic. You don't need to know more than anyone else in that team. Sometimes that is difficult, particularly when you're starting off on that management journey. Knowledge is not the skill. I would argue the skill is in finding those people with the knowledge, being able to get them to want to work with you, to mold them into a team, or if they're not in your team, to at least create that relationship so you can have the discussion. One of the best examples for where that hit me really quickly was that very first job. So 18 years old in Northern Ireland, walking the streets. Walking the streets was not courageous. Absolutely not. That was fear. That was fear of me looking a fool in front of the guys, of me being unable to go home and hold my head up high. Nonsense, but that's what went through my mind at the time. The real skill there was in facing up to 30 blokes who were all older than me. Every single one was older. Everyone was more experienced. Everyone had done at least 2 tours in Northern Ireland. And the skill was in then telling them what to do with some credibility. And that took a bit of time, and I knew I was failing in that early on. As was pointed out by my platoon sergeant a number of times, ultimately which led to a one-way conversation behind the toilet block, and when I'd mopped up the blood, maybe I reflected on how I was doing. Those honest conversations, though, of actually realizing yourself what you can do, what you can't do, where you need help, is critical. Another example, I mentioned running the interrogation team in Iraq in '91. Very high profile, very high pressure job. There were 6 of us. We were dealing at one point with a pool of POWs of 13,000. Clearly there was sifting that went on beforehand to work out who it would be valuable for us to speak to. I don't speak Arabic, therefore I was interrogating an individual, asking them questions, because that's what interrogation is. Forget what's in the pictures, it is having a conversation. I don't speak Arabic, I was having to do that through an interpreter. That brings out so many challenges in respect of, one, I've got to trust this guy, that he's not manipulating the question for his own need. I've got to trust his answers. And equally, I've got to be totally reliant, because at the end of the day, I need to write reports, I need to write product based on what I'm being told. You don't need to be the expert. Second element of courage is, for me, standing up, and it's the obvious one, standing up and having the confidence to do the right thing. It's having those challenging and courageous conversations. We had a really good conversation earlier when we were doing the career speed dating about if you want to instill change as managers, sometimes you get those people where you have to do something about it, and you have to have a really difficult, hard conversation. And sometimes you may bring in organizational change. We've all, I would suggest, got to get to the point where we can have those value-add conversations, where we're not spending 45 minutes of the hour meeting talking around the issue so that you don't tread on the toes, but in a supportive, and it has to be a supportive and engaging way, you can have a direct conversation. That's hard. Again, I come back, I would always concentrate on assessing people's strengths, weaknesses. Are they genuine? Who can you trust? Who are the influencers? And where do you actually need to have the detail? I bound that all into courage, because it is a hard piece. If you know something needs changing, then do it. There will be collateral. It's a very military term, collateral damage. But we face that every day. You have a hard conversation, someone's going to end up being naffed off. Accept it. Understand that's going to happen. But most importantly, as a leader, plan for it. Work out how you can mitigate that. Work out how you can actually turn that situation to a positive. It is hard. It does take time. But it's worth it in spades. The next crucial value for me is integrity. I'm actually going to read my only management book. I've scanned them, some are good. This is the sole manual that was given out in Sandhurst. That's it. There is no other documentation that was provided to me for that 7 months training, which enabled me to try and lead a group of guys in difficult circumstances. It's called Serve to Lead. I think the title in itself is interesting. I'm going to read from an excerpt that was written by a senior officer, unknown, to the Times after the Boer War. I'll try not to make it too dull, but think about what's being said. It's entitled Being Straight. There's one trait in the character of a leader that above all things really counts, and perhaps counts in war even more than in peace, and that's being straight. No amount of ability, knowledge, or cunning can ever make up for not being straight. Once those under him or her find out that a commander is absolutely straight in all his dealings with them, and free from the slightest taint of self-interest, other than the self-interest of which we're all guilty when we're striving for the victory of causes we believe to be right, they will love him as a leader, trust him, work for him, follow him, and should occasion arise, die for him. We're not asking our guys to do that. But the method, the principle that's in that, for me, speaks volumes. We must be absolutely straight with those that we deal with. We've got to be consistent, and we've got to be honest. Because once you lose that trust, it's gone. People can say it takes an awful long time to bring it back. It will never come back, not to the full extent. So be honest with yourself. Work out your own definition of what that means if you decide this is one of your values. Work out where your own boundaries are. Understand your own red lines and stick to them. Be consistent. Another example, I'll go back to Northern Ireland. We had a compensation culture in the province at that time. If there was an incident, if there was a riot and someone was damaged, in your guise, damaged, what an awful phrase. If we were injured, then the soldiers would go to the platoon sergeant or platoon corporals and they would exaggerate their injuries. People were paid by the stitch. So either you bought off the MO, the medical officer, he drank whiskey in our battalion, and he'd put an awful lot of stitches in a small space, or your platoon sergeant would use a razor and would extend it. And that was going on quite commonly in the battalion. For me, that was a red line. I was hugely unpopular. But it was something I had the support of my leadership team. I discussed it with them. I think I was seen as a bit of a pain in the backside, really, by the other officers that were in the area. But for me, it was important. Be honest with yourself. And also be honest with your team at all times. Even if that honesty is, I can't tell you about this, be honest. They will find out if you're lying. That's not quite so easy to be black and white, but you've got to work out your own lines. It's also really difficult when you're challenged to do something you disagree with. And we're all put in that position. Sometimes you will be asked to do something and you think, actually, that's wrong. Be honest with yourself. Challenge it with all your might. Have a rational discussion. Argue your case. But at the end of the day, once that decision is made, if you haven't got your way, if you haven't influenced the situation, what I'd say is do one of two things. Either JFDI, get on with it, but own it. You take responsibility for that decision. Don't undermine the people above you. Take ownership, take accountability and deliver it. Or, if actually you really don't believe in that decision, do something about it. You've got to decide how far you go. I've got to decide how you go. That may be resignation, it may be anything else. But once you've set your line, don't start compromising with yourself. Really easy to say, really hard to do. But for me, that's fairly core. Hopefully the next one is something that we all buy into as well. We're all in the service culture. Make a difference. Not very snappy as a title for a value, but again, it's something, it would help if I click the slide. It's something that I honestly believe in. I'll put a bit of context into that slide. That was taken in a place called Zaku in North Iraq by the Syrian border in 1992. It was after the first Gulf War. Saddam Hussein was still in power. He was driving north, moving the Kurds up into the mountains, removing them from all their food supplies and their water. There was a military operation put in place, overflights. So the Royal Air Force, the American Air Force, were overflying, were dropping food, were denying the airspace to the Iraqi Air Force. On the ground, overtly, there may have been the odd covert operation going on. Overtly, there were 12 of us. I was one of 12 overt land forces in an area the size of Yorkshire. We were a physical footprint in the ground to do two things. One, to provide a degree of comfort so that occasionally the villages saw that there were coalition forces on the ground. Yes, we were capturing information, but that wasn't the prime purpose. That 4 months I spent there is the most impactful period of my life. These people had nothing, absolutely nothing. Actually, the guy that's in the photo, and I'll tell you a bit about him, although to my eternal shame, I cannot remember his name. I could have lied, I can't remember it, and I'm incredibly disappointed. He was paid $12 a day. He was one of 250 Peshmerga local militia who were guarding us 12 guys in various shifts wherever we decided to go. We wanted to reward him. I wanted to give him more money. We could have afforded a lot more money between us. There are ways of of generating additional funds to pay for these guys. He wasn't interested. All he wanted was for me to go to his house, meet his family, meet his kids, sit down, have some tea, have some bread. That was it. That's all he wanted. Because that gained him respect, that gained him recognition with the wider extended family and the people in the area. I come back then to that value of making a difference. What I'm trying to get to on this is learn what matters. Learn what matters to the people you're working with and focus your efforts on meeting their needs. As a service culture, we're used to doing it, but really go that extra mile. That's often uncomfortable. Again, to my eternal shame at the time, I was really uncomfortable with that photo. And isn't that pathetic? The bit I was uncomfortable about was I was holding his hand. And isn't that stupid? Times have changed. I've changed. That's great. But accept discomfort. It's worth its while. In 2001, I was managing a global card loss team for RBS Cards. This is a business that we're far more involved in. I was managing my routine, managing stress, managing VIPs. But again, as you do every day, give it your all. Make that difference to that individual, whatever it is. In my context, it was someone that might have been on a holiday in South America, lost their cards. How do we get money to them? How do we support them? Just think out of the box as to how we can support and give the extra service to make our customers' lives easier. Those are my three values. Not very complicated, not very original, but they mean something to me. And again, I would encourage all of you to work out, what are you trying to achieve? What are the outcomes that you're trying to deliver? And work out your values, and then live by them. So the other area, and Barclay did a brilliant introduction to this earlier, but for me, which is crucial, is about creating genuine partnerships. For me, this is the most important approach to exposing our values and to use them to influencing real change. I will focus on the team, but it's not just the team. It's everyone that you have interactions with. For me, I think there are three core areas. First one is understanding people. Know your team inside out. Know the skills. Know the weaknesses. Know the strengths. Know what pisses them off. Know what really motivates them. Know about their family. Be able to have those open and honest conversations. I would encourage that for everyone. Again, it's difficult, but try. I'll use an example of when I was running an operation in Hamburg, which went on for 4 or 5 months. This was a human operation. It was a combined surveillance and research operation. We were working against Irish Republican support groups at the time. All of this is in open press. You won't need to worry about yourselves afterwards. Think about the complexity, actually, of understanding how you're going to get someone to work for you and potentially work against their own family, work against their friends, work against their own briefs. Understand how what the triggers are. Those triggers might be ideology, might be finance, might be revenge. And I was thinking in my context about how I could exploit those. Again, as part of that, you've still got to have your red lines. You've still got to have your values. But do think through that, because it did lead to some interesting discussions. One of the guys we were working against was a taxi driver. He had financial problems. One of the suggestions that came up is, wouldn't it be a shame if his tyres got slashed? It would. We could have recruited him on that basis. We didn't. It wasn't the right thing to do. Once you have got people working for you, support them, nurture them, because that's crucial. And for all of the guys we worked with in that particular operation and in others, protection of that source, that asset, is crucial. Equally, to translate it back to our lens of work, protecting our relationships is crucial. It comes down to trust. It comes down to delivering on our promises. It comes down to understanding what they need and then going an extra mile. But again, I would encourage you all to think about how we can do that and bring it to life. Another example was in the Bank of China. So I mentioned I spent 6 months in Beijing. Fantastic. You know, for me, it was that building on my experience in the army of real cultural challenge and cultural diversity. But also recognizing that the outcomes that the Chinese we were working with were totally different to ours. We had this fantastic plan of coming up with a genuine joint venture to earn money to deliver payment processing in a particular area. The Chinese, in the end, transpired what they were after was having us working them for 6 months, taking our knowledge and then doing it themselves. Probably cheaper, to be fair, probably better given RBS's bank history. So actually, again, it comes back to understanding that. When we did understand that, we backed off. That was a courageous decision. It cost £5.3 million. It did get up to Fred Goodwin level at the board as to why we were pulling out, but it was the right thing to do. And again, I remind you, for me, this is not about just your team. It's about all of your working partnerships. The next element is embrace change. Change is going to happen. Change should happen. Be an active participant. Plan for it. Plan your succession. Think about how that's going to happen and have that what-if mindset. What if it goes wrong? We had a great presentation earlier on Snowmageddon. That was successful because it was clear there was an awful lot of planning that went into it. There was an awful lot of planning that went on after it to do lessons learned. We need to do that better. There's a key piece in here for me about risk-taking. I do strongly believe that to be an effective leader, you must take considered risks. It's up to each one of us to work out what our threshold and our acceptance of risk is, but go into it with your eyes wide open. Again, it's linked to self-awareness. You've got to balance for yourselves. What is gung-ho? You know, what's that maniacal, yeah, I've got an idea here, let's just go and do it. Sally's probably smiling now because she accuses me of it on a daily basis. But you've got to measure that against the other side, which is spending so much time reflecting, planning, understanding what you're going to try and achieve, making sure you've got a completely robust plan that you've missed the opportunity. Don't base your strategy when you're all working about what you want in your teams on the plan alone, because lots of things will divert you. Again, be dynamic in preparing to adapt. One completely truthful story, I mentioned it in the bar last night, but I'll mention it again, which demonstrates this perfectly, is my brother-in-law lives in Northern Ireland. He lived in a particularly dodgy area. I was strongly encouraged by the Army Vetting Agency not to have conversations with him for the first 10 years of our marriage. I did go and see him with permission at one point at his house. He knew what I did. He came to our wedding. His wife didn't know I was in the army, certainly didn't know I was anything to do with the intelligence corps. We went to his house. We then went on to the reception. I won't go into details, but at some point in the evening I was in trap 2. And I was in what I call the thunderbox, the toilet, and I was just about to have a contemplative moment and was preparing myself. I sat down, my pistol fell out of the back of my trousers and went under the gap to next door. Kindly, it was pushed back, which is but it did lead to some interesting conversations. You've got to adapt. I would love to say I got away with it. I didn't. Again, through all of this change, though, it's crucial that you bring people with you, that you're honest in your communication, that they know what you're on about, they know what you're trying to achieve, and that they are empowered to be an active participant. The last area in respect of, for me, creating genuine partnerships is about positivity. I'm renowned, and I suspect the mick is taken on a daily basis, because any time someone says, "How are you?" my standard response is tip-top. Don't really know what that means, but they seem to get the idea. Another standard response is hardly a challenge. Yeah, I will look at every opportunity, but because of that, people see me as being positive. Maybe totally unrealistic, but they see me as being positive, and they want to have conversations. People will want to work with you if you're positive, if you're engaging, if you want to go out and have a conversation. There is a danger of overcommitting. There is a danger of saying you can do something when actually you can't. But that's about how you then frame that message, and being honest with them to say, look, I have looked at this, we have tried, but we can't. Be honest. Also, in terms of positivity, recognize the fantastic skills that you all have. You haven't got every skill, and going back to my first point, you will not be the expert in every discipline that you have to manage, but recognize the great skills you've got. Going back to Berkeley again, I totally agree. This definition of soft skills, it's an awful, awful word, but I can't think of anything better either. But those things are crucial. We've all got really good skills when it comes to discussing, talking, having conversations with people, understanding what they want. That is crucial. Also, by recognizing what you don't have and what you do have and focusing on the good points, actually it leads you to have engaging conversations with a wider audience base. And again, that's fantastic. It's another link to have another conversation. So those are the key points about creating a genuine partnership. You need to work it out for yourself. If you believe in this, you might turn around and say, Nigel, you're talking guff. Fine. That's fine. This works for me. I did mention transferable skills. So I'd been an army officer for 14 years. I'd had a great time. I left. Clearly the obvious choice was to move to nightclub management in Leeds. It was partly a conscious decision. I did always want to get into pub management, actually, but that seemed to do the ticket. But I also recognised that I had a whole pocket load of transferable skills in terms of dealing with people. I worked out that there are really 4 or 5 things that, for me to be a success in this business, I needed to have. 1, I need to know about people. Yeah, I could do that. I could work with diverse groups of people. I could create effective relationships. I could work with a team in high-pressure situations. And believe me, on the bars there on a Friday night, there were some high-pressure situations. I could recruit people. I think one of my skills is in terms of identifying talent, identifying skills, and bringing them on board. And I think that's crucial. And I felt that I could work across cultures. So people, tick, could do that. Logistics. Okay, yeah, I felt fairly confident about that. Getting the right things in the right place at the right time. I think we're all fairly good at that. About booze, I could definitely do that. About music, well, to be fair, I blagged that completely. But the last one, fashion, aced it. In all seriousness, your leadership, your organisation, your service management skills are all highly transferable. They are hugely valuable. Recognise it, embrace it. If you do need help, ask for it, but be confident and true to yourself, because you are all stars. At whatever level you're working, you wouldn't be here unless you wanted to invest in your own development, invest in improving your own skills. As I say, I don't really buy into many of the management books. There are some really great excerpts, but as for the whole books, they rarely do it for me. The one theme, however, I do buy into is being authentic, being true to yourself. And if you do that in everything you do, then you will be a success. Unfortunately, I was a disaster in the nightclub business, but it was great. It was a risk worth taking, and I wouldn't have missed it for the world. In summary then, what I would say is work out your own values, and then most importantly, live them. Take every opportunity to create genuine partnerships. Know your team, empower your team, and if you do, then if you're lucky, they'll crawl bare-breasted over broken glass to support you. Seek opportunities to make a difference, and then again, do everything you can to make it happen. Most importantly, enjoy life. It is a job. You can make a difference, but don't take it too seriously. I started with a quote, I'll end with a quote. I'd like to say it's Shakespeare. To be fair, it might not be. The quote is, as you slide down the banister of life, may all the splinters be pointing in the right direction. Thanks very much. Any questions?
Slightly over time, but any questions? I'm going to give it to Andy to... Stunned silence.
I know. It's all right, I can take robust criticism. I get it from Sally every day. Why is that not a surprise to people?
Really? No? Oh, there we go. Thank you.
You're right. When's a situation where you've had to embrace change, but it's been really difficult to decide what change needs to be embraced?
So I mentioned I was in Royal Bank Scotland originally, starting in operational service management. So our team, there were 16 of us split between Gateshead and Harrogate. We were in the wrong location. There was a business drive to actually merge the teams, and the best place for that, looking at it critically, was to merge with a debit card function. So we managed the credit card areas. That debit card function was based up in Edinburgh, up in Gogarburn. I would say the hardest piece is to firstly propose a change that was going to put me out of a job, put 15 of my team, of which I'd recruited most of them, out of a job, and to do that in a way that actually it was behind the doors. They didn't know until at the end of the day, apart from one of my other core managers. What was even harder was during this process, in which I fully intended and fully expected to be made redundant myself, I was given another opportunity. That opportunity wasn't given to any of the rest of that team. That was hard. Did I engineer that? No. Actually, did I see the value in it? Yes. Do I still wonder whether that was the right decision? Yeah. Yeah. Because I felt I'd let my team down. It was a completely fortuitous, for me, occasion of the meeting of those two opportunities. But yeah, that was hard. So the need for change was right. I knew what the business outcome that I was trying to deliver against was. That was very clear. I was, I'd like to think, honest in coming up to do that options analysis and to put a plan in place. That plan in place, as I say, took the team away. What I did do was spend hours making sure that all of the right opportunities were available for those teams. So we had the right training, we had the right package, where we could do relocation, we did. But it wasn't successful in all cases. I'd say that's the hardest.
You spoke about identifying your values and living your values. When you're building a team, how important is it, do you think, that that team share your values?
I think it's different to that. Yeah, I've got my values, absolutely. I think what's really important is actually sitting down with the team and understanding what we as a team want as our values. I would be very surprised if they're hugely different from what any individual's values are around that team. But I think it's hugely important that it is the team that creates that value set. And it's the team that works out what it means in terms of their daily lives, their daily working practices that will bring them to life. So I hope that sort of answers your question. As I say, it's the team that has to drive that. And they need to be fully empowered and engaged to do that.
More questions?
Great.
You can go
Thanks
now.
very much.
So just to say, as somebody that is part of Nigel's management team, he does live those values. The result of that is that we do have very honest conversations most days, most weeks, but it does make for interesting meetings, to say the least. That almost brings us to a break, just a couple of